When I moved to Korea 2 years ago, I thought I was a pretty adventurous eater. Today I want to talk about the foods that Korea basically had to force onto me for me to like them. And I say force because none of this was instant. Some of it took months, some of it took over a year or even years, but each one came with a specific moment where something finally clicked. Let's get into it. Let's start with the one that I think genuinely confuses foreigners more than any other food in Korea. Cold noodles in cold broth, served with ice in it. My first experience with naengmyeon was at a train station restaurant, which is probably the origin of my problem. I was on a group tour in Korea and was taken here to try a classic Korean dish. I genuinely did not understand what I was eating. The noodles were darker in colour than I expected, slightly chewy, and almost gummy. The broth was cold and faintly sweet and faintly sour all at the same time. And there was this little jar of mustard and vinegar on the side that I had absolutely no idea what to do with because no one told me. So I ate it politely and I thought it was pretty strange and not something I would order again. And then I didn't eat it again for years. The moment it changed was actually in summer. Proper Korean summer, you know, where all the cicadas are out and it's so humid that it makes you feel like you're breathing through a wet towel. And I was at lunch with a Korean friend who ordered naengmyeon without even looking at the menu. And I just copied her, thinking, well, this must be what you do here. Sitting in that cold restaurant with the aircon blasting, drinking that cold broth with pieces of ice in it, it just made sense in a way I never expected. Knowing a little about Korean food history now, I know now that naengmyeon actually started as a winter food. They used to use ice stores, which of course are abundant in the winter time. But now it's a classic way to cool down amid the summer heat. Modern naengmyeon is designed for that specific kind of relief from the heat that I've only ever experienced in Korea. And when I finally experienced eating naengmyeon in that context, not as a curiosity, but as the answer to a problem that my body was actually having, I got it. Now, when the summer heat comes, which it kind of is coming now, I genuinely crave it. I'll seek it out on a really hot day. And that's a sentence I would not have believed 2 years ago. Sundubu jjigae had a texture problem for me. I don't have an issue with tofu conceptually. I'd eaten plenty of it in Australia and quite like it. But firm tofu in a stir fry is a very different thing from silken tofu that's basically falling apart and looks like a brain in a spicy red broth. It looked to me like the tofu was, I guess, underdone, not finished, like it hadn't been quite cooked properly. I kept expecting a texture that wasn't coming. And then there's the egg. When you eat sundubu jjigae, they crack a raw egg into the top of the soup right at the table, and it sits there cooking in that bubbling hot broth. And for someone who wasn't used to that presentation, it was just a little odd for me. I was wrong about this one faster than the other things, to be honest. But this one took me years to come around to. Because sundubu jjigae is one of those dishes where someone basically has to sit across from you and say, this is what you eat when you're hungover or when it's cold or when you just need something warm that isn't complicated. And once I understood that it was a comfort food, not as a restaurant dish that you perform enthusiasm about, but as a thing that you actually want at 9 a.m. on a rough morning, I was completely on board. And something that is now probably one of my favorite Korean foods. We'd like to acknowledge the viewers who support this channel through channel membership. Your generosity helps us to continue exploring Korea with care, curiosity, and respect. If these stories have meant something to you and you'd like to help us to create more of these kinds of videos, you can find out more about becoming a member through the link below. Makgeolli took me the longest time to understand as a drink. It's cloudy, it's fizzy, it's sour and sweet at the same time, and the texture is not something you'd expect from something that you're drinking socially. It's kind of thick. In Australia, when you go out, you know what you're getting. Beer, wine, something clear. Makgeolli looks like something that's still in the process of being made into a drink. My brain just kept putting it in the wrong category. Like maybe I was thinking it would be more like shike and more sweet and less alcoholic, but I was completely wrong, of course. And with makgeolli, culturally, I didn't have the context for it. I didn't know that it was a farmer's drink, that it's been around for centuries, that it's essentially the most democratic drink in Korea. Made from rice, affordable and shared. I just knew that it tasted unusual and I wasn't sure how I was supposed to feel about that. That it's been having a serious craft revival for young Koreans, much like the craft beer trend at the moment in Australia, and that there are entire bars dedicated to drinking premium makgeolli the same way that there are wine bars. I started tasting it differently. I stopped comparing it to beer or to soju, and I stopped expecting it to taste like something I already knew. Makgeolli is just a category of its own. Makgeolli and pajeon in the rain is a whole thing here. And I fully understand it now. I remember when I realized I actually liked makgeolli for the first time was when we'd been hiking at Makgeolli, and it was a beautiful spring evening and we had pajeon and omija makgeolli, I think. It was pink in color, so I'm pretty sure it was omija considering it comes from Makgeolli. When I just got to experience that after walking for a few hours, I totally understood it. Now it's my preferred drink. Even over wine, which is a huge thing to say for someone who comes from a famous wine region, which 2 years ago I absolutely would not have predicted. Now, this one is interesting because I love sweet things. I don't know that I've ever met a sweet that I didn't like. For example, red bean paste, I was completely on board with. No convincing needed. So you'd think that sulpang would be a guaranteed win for me, but it wasn't, not at first. My issue was the bun itself, the bread. It just seemed so dense.
Nope.
Kind of doughy in a way that felt heavy, like as soon as I'd taken a bite. In Australia, if something is bread-based and sweet, it's usually quite light and often flaky, like a pastry. But sulpang is none of those things. It's soft and thick and substantial, a bit heavy. And my brain kept telling me this is gonna be way too sweet. Then I actually tried one. And the first thing I thought was, this tastes like a pancake. Not in a bad way. I was in a genuinely delightful, where has this been my whole life way. The dough has that same slightly sweet, airy quality, but with the fermented quality about it, it just works. I don't know why I resisted it. The answer was pancakes the whole time. Actually, right now, I want to go and get one, cut it open, and then put butter on it. Sorry, that might seem like a sacrilege to Korean food purists, but it's so yummy. Now, here's what's really interesting too. It's called sulpang. Sul means alcohol in Korean, and so it's actually made out of makgeolli. And the reason why is really interesting, because a long time ago in Korea, I heard that yeast wasn't abundant, so it wasn't that easy to be able to make bread in the traditional Western way. What some Korean cooks worked out is that if you put fermented alcohol, makgeolli, into a dough mixture, it will allow the dough to rise, which is what's needed to make bread. And it also has this beautiful sweet quality to it too. Now I think about it in my head as its own special category of bread, unlike anything else. So here we are. This part of the video I want to call the bonus round, but I think it's actually the most honest part. Korea has an extraordinary food culture. That's no secret. And I mean that sincerely. Years in and I'm still discovering more and more foods that I love. But there are some things that Korea just can't replace. Things that I miss from Australia in a way that surprises me. And Roseman has very strong feelings on some of these too. So, Roseman, are there any foods from Australia that you miss? Now, for context, Roseman lived in Australia for about 5 years. So is there any particular food like that that you can think of from Australia that you miss now that maybe you didn't expect to miss?
Yeah, actually, it's remind me of blue cheese. The first time I tried, I absolutely hate it. The smell was so strong.
I remember.
Yeah.
I remember.
The smell was so strong, I couldn't understand why people enjoy eating it. I remember thinking, there's no way I ever like this one. But after living in Australia for a few years, I ended up trying eating it for a few times, and somehow it's completely changed. Now, I love blue cheese, and one of my favorite snack is buffalo wing with celery and blue cheese dip. I'm actually craving now. It's really funny. If you have told me a few years ago, I'll never believe you. But I guess, some food just takes time to get used to them. Somehow it's become your favorite food.
I think for me, blue cheese brings back a memory. I always think of going to my grandma's house and she would have like a kind of platter of different cheeses and like some different hams, and she can make you any sandwich you like. You would have eaten that surely.
Yeah,
at
I
Oma's
love
house.
that.
Yeah.
Now I'm actually eating one of the moldy part of blue cheese. I don't mind eating this.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things that Korea just doesn't have, cheese culture. And I think specifically blue cheese, we have tried a blue cheese here, but it just was like kind of bitter in flavour. It just not quite right. Yeah. I guess thinking about cheese, it sort of brings me to the broader dairy conversation. In Korea, the dairy quality is pretty hit or miss. And by that I mean most of the time it's a bit of a miss. Korean milk is fine, it does the job. But if you've grown up in Australia where dairy is just so good, even the cheap stuff is amazing. Good milk, good butter, amazing cheese. Korean dairy is just a big step down from what my expectations of dairy are, I guess. And also, it's a lot more expensive. Yogurt is almost always a letdown in Korea. It's often sweet for some reason, and it even often has additives like gelatin in it to thicken it up because it's usually watery. And I think this is because it allows you to use less milk to make the yogurt, but I'm not sure. And don't even get me started on cheese that we eat on cheese platters like brie and camembert. It's usually imported, but it's like the cheapest version of the stuff that you can get in Australia. It's just not good. So I'm pretty devastated about that. That is one thing I wish I could eat from Australia is dairy products. I said at the start that there are foods that take time, not because they're complicated, but just because you're not quite ready for them yet. Looking at this list, the things that Korea broke me down on, the things that I was always wired for, and the things I didn't expect to miss, I think it's actually just a map of who I am and who I've become here. I didn't move to Korea just for the food. I moved because I wanted a different life from the one that I had back in Australia. But food turned out to be one of the most honest measures of how that new life is going. So it wasn't the big moments, not the big language learning milestones or the career shifts or the practical stuff. The small daily shifts. What you order without thinking, what you crave when you're tired, and what you reach for. So now I crave kimchi. I understand makgeolli. And I want sundubujigae when I'm cold. But I still miss dairy and salt and vinegar chips. I think that's actually a pretty decent summary of where I'm at. If you're new to Korean food or you've been living here for a while and you're still coming around to some of these foods, I hope this was helpful, or at least reassuring that it takes time and that that's completely normal. Let me know in the comments what Korean food took you the longest to come around to. I'm genuinely curious. And if you're Australian and you found the dairy situation genuinely upsetting, I'd like to hear about that too. If you enjoyed this video, I'd love to have you as part of our community. Subscribe to follow along as we continue to discover Korea. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. 오늘도 성공이에요.